about going to high school?
I haven't this time. I did once Pardon? Brenda, thank you so much for doing it. So kind of you. You were once not supposed to get here so early. You beat me to the punch. We have a few more coming in. Oh, thank you. I'm honored to do it. We took a while to get a date. We're giving everyone a book. So yeah. There. How are you? Good to see you.
So good.
No, everyone that comes gets a book, and if we have no idea how many people are coming. So we got like 60 books. If more come, then we'll get a list. Oh, Brenda, yeah, I did want to tell you that. If for some reason you run out of books, I don't think you will.
Welcome everyone
Okay.
to this
We'll be okay.
Sunday forum.
Of course.
Thank you for coming on a cold
Yes.
winter morning. And I wish I could show you the picture I took this morning. I went for a run and I got to see the sunrise and it was beautiful. So anyway, this morning my name is Rebecca Miller. I'm a member of the Sunday Forum Committee. And our Sunday forums, I hope you know, are opportunities for conversations about faith and life for our members and friends of Plymouth. And we offer a wide range of topics. Our guest this morning, as you know, is Bill George. He probably doesn't need any introduction, but he is a member of Plymouth. He's a former chair and CEO of Medtronic. He's currently an executive fellow at Harvard Business School, and he's been teaching leaders from CEOs to MBAs since 2004 there. And as you know, he's the author of this book that he will speak, about topics from that. And so I hope all of you will engage in a rich conversation today. Bill.
Thank you. Thanks, Rebecca. Thank you very much for having me. Nice to be at home and have such a good group. And I hope we get some dialogue going and lots of questions. And I appreciate you coming out on a cold but very sunny day. I tell Penny I'll always give up 15, 20 degrees to see the sun shining. So it may be cold, but it's beautiful out there. So thank you so much. Can everyone hear with this mic? I want to make sure. We all said, Alex? Good. Thank you. So I really wrote this book. I've written a number of books, but did everyone get a copy? Anyone who doesn't, this is Brenda Hanson, my executive assistant, who has copies. So anyone didn't get one or wants to pick up an extra one for a young person you want to give it to. I really wrote it to talk about the transformation leadership we're going through to a new generation of leaders. I would say many of us, certainly myself, have kind of had our shot. But I think the most important thing is that we empower and encourage younger people, starting all the way from Gen X, which goes into the early 50s, down to the Gen Zs that I know less about, in their early 20s to really step up and lead. And I think we need leaders. We've got, in my opinion, way too many managers in all walks of life and not nearly enough leaders. So we'll talk about what that means. But the title of today is Leading with Your Heart. So let me give a little context for that. I started out back in the 1960s. I went to Georgia Tech and I had summer jobs. And as a young engineer, I would take a stopwatch and put it on, here I'm 18 years old, and put it on people in their 50s and watching all their movements and trying to suggest how they could do their job more efficiently, running machine tools and very complex instruments that I wouldn't have a clue of how to run. But that was really for an era of leading with our hands, whether we were miners working on production lines, building construction sites. And then starting in the 1970s, we moved to an era of leading with our heads. The computers came on and everyone started, and everything was big data and, computational models, and you could get the answer with statistics. We're still, and it's still coming. We're talking about artificial intelligence, replacing all of your jobs and giving you all the answers. That's not going to happen, but I do think it's a very significant change. But what I see happening now is we need people to lead with their hearts. We need to move into an era. Being the smartest person in the room is not sufficient. Okay, it may be necessary, but it's not sufficient. And we need people that know how to lead with their hearts. So as we're getting settled in here, I'd just like to ask you a question. Appreciate all of you coming. What does that mean to you to lead with your heart? I've got my own thoughts on it, but what does it mean to you to lead with your heart? Anyone want to volunteer? Yes.
For me, it's a synthesis of trying to figure out what's the right thing to do.
It's a synthesis of figuring out the right thing to do. Yes.
Also looking beyond yourself.
Looking beyond yourself. If I can just pause on that, one of the most important things I think every leader has to do is to make what I call the I to we journey. Because, we start out, we get in, I have grandchildren in high school now, and they're working hard to try to get good grades so they can get into college. Then into college, we want to get good grades. So either we get into graduate school or we get a good job. And then we go to work in our jobs. And I bet most of our first jobs are what we call individual contributors. You're not managing, you're not leading, you're an individual contributor. And I think we have to make that I to we journey. And I've seen a lot of leaders never make that. They use we language, but they're really talking about the royal we themselves. And they want you to follow them as opposed to empowering you to do what you can do. They really want you to do what they want you to do. And so I think this is a very, very important step. How about some more of you? What do you think it means to lead with your heart?
Leading with purpose.
Leading with purpose, having a clarity of purpose for your work and why you're doing it. One of the things we're going through right now, so-called great resignation. And I've heard a lot of baby boomer CEOs that we have a program at Harvard. We have about 400 CEOs come through in groups of 12 at a time. So over a long period of years. And, they'll say, these millennials, they're not committed. They just want to change jobs all the time. And I said, why they're changing jobs is because there's no sense of purpose. They don't just want to work to make $2.91 a share. They have to fail. If I'm going to devote my life and give you 60, 70 hours a week, this is true at all levels, not just at high levels. This is true at every level in organizations. And I think during COVID, we had so much time at home. A lot of people are kind of rethinking their lives and say, is this what I want to do with the rest of my life? And a lot of people are saying no. And that's led to worker shortage. And in all walks of life, it's hard to find people today. We certainly see it in healthcare, in nursing, the stress on nurses right now because we don't have enough people. But I think it comes from, and that's a field where there's real clarity of purpose. But I think people are saying that. The other thing I hear too from millennials in particular is that if you don't have a diversity, equity, and inclusion plan, if I'm not treated like an equal here just because I come from a diverse background, then I don't really want to be here. And so it's that, if you don't have a climate change plan, I'm concerned about climate change. Maybe our company's not in that business, but I'm concerned about that. And if you don't have one, then this is not where I want to work. And so this is creating a whole new challenge for leaders, where employees have real agency and they have choices, many choices. What else? How otherwise you leave your heart? Yes.
I would say that for me, leading with the heart is about making decisions and creating visions that are based in love, justice.
Based on love. Thank you. Yes. Love, caring. Yes. Right.
Ethics and morality.
Ethics and morality. Okay. Good. Excellent. Yes. Now we're in raising our hand. Compassion. Bingo. Thank you. Okay. Respect. Okay. Understanding.
I was gonna say, even in business, but I think especially in business, to have an awareness of what's most holistically healthy for everybody involved.
What's most holistically healthy for everyone involved? Great. Anyone else? Yes.
I know you mentioned it, I think it's thinking beyond the workplace and especially who you are leading, what they are experiencing both in the workplace, but also in their larger lives.
You know, one of the unique things that happened with COVID is we're all, is everything okay?
I just want to mention to the people that are watching remotely,
Yes, thank you.
there's a number of people that are participating on Zoom. And so if you use the Q&A feature, we'll be able to see your questions and we
Yeah.
want to hear from you. So
And please join us. Thank you for joining us. Okay, say that again because I want to pick up on that.
So just thinking beyond the workplace,
Yeah.
including who you are leading and what they are experiencing in and outside.
Well, one of the unique things about the COVID period when we're doing meetings on Zoom is we're kind of coming into people's bedrooms, you know, and you see children coming through the room. I remember I was on a board meeting, I think it was for the Guthrie, and the chair of the board kind of said, "Who are those little gremlins crawling around?" And people have dogs in their laps or cats in their lap, cats coming across. No, but it kind of collapses that separation between, all of a sudden, we have some understanding where it used to be there was like a wall between our home life and our work life. I once said to people, can you be the same person at home and at work? Oh, no, I could never do that. Peg?
Building on compassion, I would say it's practicing self-compassion and then pausing to put yourself in the shoes of the other person.
Well, that's really beautiful. Let me repeat that. Everyone sort of can hear that. Peg Burke says it's compassion, self-compassion, and then it's sharing that so that everyone can have that sense of compassion for everyone else. Yeah, I've had a number of discussions with Buddhist monks about this because the concept of self is different in Buddhism, but I think they're coming around to the idea. If I would say, let me go out on a limb here with you, and I would say that if you don't have compassion for yourself, you can't have genuine compassion for other people, or you wear yourself down. And I think we need to have compassion, and I think compassion for ourselves comes from accepting ourselves for who we are, with our flaws. Because I went for a long time in my life, you know, trying to not let you see my flaws. In fact, I was blaming them on my father, my poor deceased father, that I'm so impatient, and sometimes I lack tact, and sometimes I'm too direct, and I was blaming the characteristics which my father also had on him, which of course it wasn't his problem, it was my problem. And I had to develop that compassion. By the way, there is a wonderful CD, if you ever want to get a CD by David White, with W-H-Y-T-E, called The Poetry of Self-Compassion. It had a transformative effect on me. And particularly the poem by Derek Walcott, who's from the West Indies and was, I think, poet laureate for a period of time. He died recently. Called Love After Love, but just a wonderful poem of how you accept the parts of yourself that you've rejected, that you want to push those away and you don't want to acknowledge your own flaws. And he talks later, and what was that poem we read the other day, Penny, about how the flaws, the Faces of Braga, and how the flaws in the carver's hands, like we were having wrinkles in your face when you get older, really are the signs of wisdom. And having gone through it all. And no, but how the flaws are really an integral part of who you are. And I think this is really hard for many of us to accept, to know who we are. Any other comments about, yes?
I
I don't know if somebody's actually used the word, but leading with the concept of the common good. They've talked about
Leading from the
issue.
common good. Good. Okay. Sonia.
We've been talking a lot about the business world or the work world, and I was thinking about the reality that a bunch of us are Plymouth leaders, and we're in the community, and that we're a pretty heady bunch. And so if we default to that, that's our
Yes.
natural way. And how wonderful it is to hear you prodding us about this idea of leading from the heart. We don't have to give up our brains. They come along with us.
Right. Wonderful. Sonia says we tend to, or a heady bunch, and we tend to default to the head. I think that's true of people in all walks of life. But people want to know you care about them. You know, they're not going to go all out, or in your organization, they're not going to do things unless they know you care. And what we've learned recently is people don't leave organizations. They leave bad managers that are toxic, that don't care. And I've talked to people that work for great organizations like Johnson & Johnson that had terrible managers, and I've encouraged them to hang in there because, and then I remember one called me up and said, I got to get out of here. My manager's just killing me and it's awful. And I said, well, hang in there for a while and look for jobs. This is Johnson & Johnson. It's a great company. You can find maybe a position somewhere else in the company. So he called me back. He's a medical doctor, and he called me back and said, well, my boss just got fired, so. But I challenge CEOs all the time. Why do you tolerate toxic people? They do much more harm than good because they are out for themselves. Why do they? Well, they think they're top performers. And lo and behold, when they get pushed out, you find out that the organization flourishes because everyone's doing well. I almost promoted someone once, and my head of HR said, Bill, do you know that he has a 40% turnover in his group? You know, people are obviously leaving. And they also take credit for what other people do. To me, if you make mistakes, if your team has problems, you take responsibility for what they say. And if they do well, you give them the credit. But I think a lot of people don't do that. And if there are problems, they tend to be blamers. And no one wants to work for a blamer that you're feeling always on edge. Well, let me describe what I mean by leading from the heart a little bit. I think one of the most significant things I learned, Penny and I were out at a conference, actually it was a Gorbachev conference 20 years ago out in San Francisco. And we did a walking meditation with the famous Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh. Many of you have heard of Thich Nhat Hanh. And it was a wonderful time, but he taught us something very powerful I never lost. He said, the longest journey you'll ever take is the 18 inches from your head to your heart. Just on your point. It's hard to take that journey from your head to your heart. And we are one being, so we've got to be both head and heart, you know? And maybe if you're all heart, you can't take hard decisions or do analytical work, but if you're all head, you have no compassion. And one of the more interesting people, most interesting leaders, a person I would probably hold up one of the great leaders of the world today is Satya Nadella, who is of Indian descent and came to Microsoft. He's a computer engineer, went to Madison, University of Wisconsin, to get his master's degree in computer science, got his undergraduate in India, and worked at Microsoft for a number of years. But he had a significant event in his life. And his son, Zane, who sadly passed away last year, earlier at age 26, was born with cerebral palsy. And Satya said to his wife, Anu, this is going to be a really tough life having a son with cerebral palsy. And she said to him, Satya, what do you think it's going to be like for our son, Zane? You know, instead of thinking of yourself about how tough it's going to be for us to raise someone with cerebral palsy, what do you think it's going to be like for him? And that totally transformed, that one event in his life totally transformed him. And when he became CEO, he succeeded Steve Ballmer as one of these big blustery guys, yell, shout, scream, and dance around, jump around. And, power, everything was power at the center. And the company didn't flourish for 14 years after Ballmer took over. Stock price was lower after 14 years, and they hadn't invented anything new. Well, anyway, Nadella comes in, and he said, you have to have empathy to work here. And if you don't have empathy for our customers and the problems they're causing, if you don't have empathy for your fellow employees, then you shouldn't work here. And he's been very strong on that, and they've had a fantastic performance. He's totally transformed the culture to be much more empathetic. And I know lots of CEOs in this town that can pick up the phone and call him about problems they're having, and he will get answers, as opposed to in the past, it's kind of like your problem. So I do think those qualities of empathy, the qualities of compassion you've pointed out, are all matters of the heart. And I think there's one that no one mentioned that is really important, and that's courage. And I find a lot of great managers do not have courage. They will not make the big, bold decision. They're afraid they'll make a mistake. They kind of play, it's like playing a sport not to lose. They're playing not to fail. And they are failing because they don't have the courage to make the bold move. And I think today, to be a great leader, you have to have courage. You have to take the risks. You may fail. Certainly in Medtronic, we had lots of chances where we may fail, but you have to take risks, and you may fail. So if you think of qualities like someone mentioned self-awareness, empathy, compassion, and courage, these are all matters of the heart. Now, the interesting thing is, these are not things you're born with. I think you learn them through experience. You gain courage by having life experience, and that's why life is a journey with a lot of ups and downs, and you actually have to go through that to develop. So your IQ, as my wife has informed me, really doesn't change much from the age of 10 to 70. So, it's age adjusted, but still, your IQ doesn't change, but your EQ is something, your emotional intelligence is something you develop through interaction with people. Because to me, leadership is all about relationships with people. And it took me a long time to learn that. I lost 7 elections in a row in high school and college because I was trying to be the man and well-organized, on top of everything, didn't acknowledge my own flaws, and didn't take time to build relationships. And so to me, as a leader, you've got to take time to build relationships. In fact, one of the most shocking things we've done in our program at Harvard, we did a study of CEOs who volunteered to give us data for every 15 minutes of where they were in a week, whether they were asleep, on the job, driving to work. One of the shocking things in their work hours, which are, I think, around 60 hours on average, they spent 72% of their time in meetings, either one-to-one with their direct subordinates or with top executives. So remember that number, 72%. They spent 5% of their time with employees and 3% of their time with customers. And these are people running very large organizations. So I always say, how do you know what's going on? If you're not with the people, how do you know what they're feeling, what's going on? And as we all know, in large organizations, a lot of information gets filtered as it goes up. And a lot of the bad stuff is filtered out. And if you go talk to people on the front lines, like I spent a lot of time with doctors watching procedures, they would tell you what they didn't like about our products. They were very, very blunt. And you go to the production lines, I found I could learn a lot more about the quality of our products from people on production lines than I ever could just looking at quality reports, because they would say, hey, Mr. George, we can't produce a quality product because the equipment down there doesn't work. And it's holding us back until we get new equipment or get some maintenance people in there to fix it. We can't produce quality products. And so just something to think about, I think is really important, is how the whole idea of how we develop our emotional intelligence through personal interactions, through relationships. And sometimes those are painful. And sometimes we don't like conflict. But I think it's in those relationships we really learn about ourselves. And how do we get feedback in learning about ourselves? So, yes. Yeah, please, just anytime anyone wants to interrupt you, or not interrupt, but ask a question.
Circling back a little bit to the example of the blamer being problematic. Assumedly, the blamer did something good to get to the position that the person was in. So as a leader, what do you do? How do you deal with the blamer?
How do you deal with the blamer?
I mean, you could say, okay, you're down.
I think, now I'm fairly, question is, how do you deal with somebody who's a blamer, blames her?
Or somebody that's problematic.
Yeah. I'm fairly confrontational. So I would say to you, why are you blaming her for the problem? What is your responsibility? This is even true in marriage, by the way. It's very, very easy to blame your spouse. But what is it about you that you're doing that's causing those problems? You're actually in charge. Why don't you take responsibility? Because that's what we have to do here. If you don't accept responsibility for the outcomes and you want to blame someone else, it's not, you're not going to be a good leader. And no one wants to be working in fears. Anyone want to work in a fear-based organization? And even you see with the Minnesota Vikings, there's been a change this year, and the major change is personnel haven't changed much. What's changed is gone from fear-based leadership to a much more supportive leadership. And but think about any organization. I don't think any of us want to work in a fear-based where you come to work every day. I actually had that experience, sadly. I had a wonderful mentor at Honeywell, and then a new person became CEO, and he operated very much on a fear-based situation. So I felt like I had to put on the armor going to work every day to protect myself. That's a horrible way to be, and eventually that's why I went to Medtronic, because I didn't want to come to work every day and feel like I had to protect myself, from being attacked. And so I don't think that's a situation any of us want. So, but I'd like to go to talk about what it means to be a moral leader, okay? And I think this is something we need to have, moral leaders. I suspect most of you are moral leaders. And you don't have to have direct reports to be a moral leader, but you have to stand for something. And so I think you really have to say you're willing to stand up and be counted. And that takes moral courage. So this is one of the issues. Now, I realize I can be critical, so I'm going to be critical of some people. But Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook, he built social media. He did some great things, okay? But he never had the chance to develop a real moral compass for his actions. So he doesn't know how to make decisions. So there was, when Cambridge Analytica stole 50 million, that's quite a few people, their profiles so they could profile them back in 2016. He knew about this, and he didn't do anything to stop it. And it didn't come out until 2018 or 19 when some media person uncovered it. But just think about that, the harm that people did to steal your personal information. You think you created a friend site. This whole thing was created as a friend site. And you think you're communicating with your friends, and all of a sudden all this information is out. Maybe you're unhappy with your spouse. Maybe you're unhappy with your work. Do you really want to be psychologically profiled and have everything fed to you that way? And people are that causing you to split and go even further to the extreme. And then in more recently, in the 2020 election, there was a doctored video. We talk about this in my book, of Nancy Pelosi. And what they did is they took her video and slowed it way down to make her appear to be drunk. And then they played it in ads about, the leader of the Democratic House of Representatives is basically drunk. And they came to him and said, should we take it down or put it up? And he finally decided to leave it up because he knew it would attract more people that wanted to. So think about that. Where is the moral compass that he has? And can you lead without a moral compass? More recently, Elon Musk. Now, I believe in free speech. I imagine everyone in this room believes in free speech. But there have to be limits to our free speech. If you don't like people who are Muslims, you don't say that. You don't attack people who are Muslim. Or the anti-Semitism since Musk took over has trebled 3 times. And I find this totally unacceptable. The anti-gay, anti-LGBTQ plus statements have trebled. Racists have gone up 3 or 4 times. Racism. John?
I think you should go to Washington, D.C. for a year. Sit in the Capitol.
Yeah.
And every congressman, particularly from the chaos conference, ought to spend time. But how do you transpose what you're talking about into this bizarre, wildly dysfunctional public arena, political arena?
John's asking, how do we take these ideas? I must confess, I've intentionally not studied political leaders. I'm not sure my ideas, John, would allow someone to get elected because we are electing people on the extremes. And I think if you saw any any of the election, excuse me, of the Speaker of the House the last 5 days. You got an example of that. People are not there to lead or on behalf of the country. They're there to gain power for themselves, if I can be so blunt. And I'm not a believer in power-based leadership, but I think we have a real serious problem. So I'm going to give you an answer. John's asked a profound question about how do you transform them. I'm going to say something that half of you are going to really dislike me for, okay? But I really think today the issue is we can't sit back and wait to get Washington to do it, okay? We have to do it ourselves. I had CEOs, we had a dinner party at our home last night. We had CEOs of two very major companies here, Xcel Energy, Ecolab. You've heard of the companies. They have lots of employees between them, all around the country. And the head of Xcel Energy has big operations in Texas. That's significant to what I'm going to say. So I asked about the question, since Roe versus Wade was overturned by the Supreme Court, what have you changed within your policies relative to abortion? You know the answer for both of them? Nothing. Our health plan allows you to get health care wherever you need it. And if you're working in an Xcel facility in Texas and you need to come to Minnesota, for whatever reason, you can come. We'll pay for your travel. We'll pay for you to have the procedure. No questions asked. We're not going to invade your privacy. So Mary, if your daughter has to come here for a procedure, we'll support that. And it's the same thing with PepsiCo. Now, PepsiCo is very nervous about talking about, they have 20,000 employees in Texas. See, in Texas, they passed a law that's against the law to aid and abet anyone leaving the state to have an abortion. And by the way, this is a charming law because if you turn in your neighbor, because you heard they were doing that, they're taking their daughter to California or to wherever, Oklahoma, if you turn them in and they're convicted of a crime, quote unquote, you'll get a $10,000 bounty, which is, you know. So, but it's interesting. The reason I use this example is kind of a, you know, it's kind of a poignant example, is that I think we as leaders just have to decide what's the right thing to do, you know? And we have to take some risks. People are taking risks, but you have to decide what is the right thing to do. In some ways, let's just do what we think is right. And I think, and to me, as a moral leader, I think you just have to do it. And so, yeah, I'd like to change all those people. And there are good people in Washington that are very dedicated, so I'm not putting them all down. But I think I think we have so much power to influence in nonprofit organizations, in healthcare, in academic organizations, in the military, in medicine, and in for-profit corporations. There's just huge opportunities to really make a difference. And I think that's why I think we need leaders to really step up to come to these situations. You look like you have a question.
How do you get the people who don't believe, the inconvincible, who believe all the lies, to change their mind? What do you do to do that?
You know, I don't know how. You know, I can't. She asked the question, how do you get people that are not, that believe all the lies? You know, I think what's going on in communications today is terrible, okay? And I'm trying to write an article. I'm a big soccer nut, and there's a huge war going on in U.S. soccer because I was at a conference on moral leadership, that's significant, with the U.S. national soccer team coach, and the head of the organization said, this is under Chatham House rules, everything is confidential. And one of his principles, which is in this book, is it's not what you can do, it's what you should do. When you make a decision, pause and think about what's the right thing to do here. It's not what I can get away with doing. Mark Zuckerberg was quoted once in saying, it's okay to do things that are unethical as long as they're not illegal. Well, that's obviously a bad principle. But anyway, they're having a war between two leading families in U.S. soccer because under the Chatham House rules, no one is allowed to share anything. And he shared a confidential story how one of the players was acting out and how he handled that. And they brought the team together, team leaders, and then this young man was either have to go home or he had to apologize individually to each team member, which he did. And then he got more playing time. Well, his parents were very upset about this, and they've now created this war. Anyway, But the problem was, the reason the way it got out is because some journalist there who was invited as a guest, who was CEO of a new publication, took and secretly transcribed the discussion and then published it on his website. And so what do you do when you can't have confidential discussions? All of us have confidential discussions all the time. We don't want those. So I think there has to be a certain amount of respect, and we have to treat people with respect, and that gets to really, where's your moral compass? Where's your moral compass? How do you set your compass? And what determines how you make decisions? Do you want to follow up? What's that? The golden rule? Yeah, and this is obviously not how you would do unto others as they can do unto you. But I do think how you set that moral compass is really critical. So I'll give you an example of someone I have great admiration for, a man named Ken Frazier, who recently retired as CEO of Merck, the world's greatest pharmaceutical research company. Ken is the grandson of a slave. He's the only person I know who's the grandson of a slave. His grandfather was born in 1859, before the Emancipation Proclamation. And after that, when the war ended, he was in South Carolina. He got his father to Philadelphia. And his father never made more than $20,000 a year. He was a janitor. And Ken's mother died when he was 12, and he had to take care of himself. And I said, did you have daycare? And he laughed, and he said, no, of course we couldn't afford that. And he said, but my father taught me the most powerful principle I ever learned. He said, Ken, you don't have to please all those people out there. You just do what you know is right. And I think if we can help people, so much of us influenced by having to please other people. And if we can be clear. And Ken, when he first came in, they had financials that would have, a financial thing his predecessor had given to the stock market. If he had met that, he would have had to cut R&D by 40%. And he went the other way and said, we'll never spend less than $8 billion on research. And he created a drug called Keytruda, which is an immunological drug, which is the largest best-selling drug of all time, but it's keeping Jimmy Carter and a million other people alive right now. But the significant thing that Ken did, and I think you all recall Charlottesville, and he was the one who walked out, and he resigned very publicly from President Trump's counsel because there was no clarity about Charlottesville. No one was willing to say, this is wrong, And the president said I'm not trying to pick on the president, but he did say that there are good people on both sides. And that really set Ken off. And I talked to him 3 times that weekend. He came out on Monday morning with a statement. He had a board meeting, which he told his board what he was going to do. He didn't ask for a vote. And on Monday morning, he came out and made a statement that this violates American principles, that all people are created equal. And he went into some depth. We have to respect people irrespective of their national origin, their gender, their race, their religion, or their sexual identity. We have to respect all people because all people are created equal. And but the interesting thing about that was he had the courage to post this. He could have resigned quietly, and he didn't. He had the courage to post it online, and 43 CEOs of America's largest corporations walked out with him. Now, I would suggest to you that it's a lot easier to walk out with the 43 than to be the one that's leading the parade out. But to me, that's a great example of moral courage because he had a lot to lose. What he could have lost was Merck, every drug they have has to be approved with the FDA, and we worked on this at Medtronic. If they didn't like you, they would just take your application when it came to the top of the stack they were reviewing and put it on the bottom. Or they could recall any product, as they did with Merck's drug Vioxx few years before Ken became CEO, or they can just reduce your prices arbitrarily. You have a question here.
I was thinking about the way you phrase, you may pick your right choice of how you're going to get with your heart, but if you use poor language or language that confuses people, you really, really don't do well for pro-choice for years. I just could not stand it. Every time I get, contribute to this, I never contributed because I just couldn't buy that language. Pro-choice and pro-life, hey, whoever picked that just was so smart about what they were thinking, how they wanted to carry what they believed.
Yeah.
Can you talk more about that? choosing the language.
Yeah, the question is, how can we choose our words more carefully? Because words can be, look, I'm having to learn too because things are changing. So I have people, friends that consider themselves Hispanic, but that now is not correct. You say Latinx. And I've even talked to some of them, they're not clear why it's not. But, you know, I mean, we do have to be very careful with language because we can offend. And there are phrases we use that sometimes would offend people. And so we just have to be careful. But I think, you know, I find in the classroom, I'll give you an example. I was criticized in a Harvard class. I was talking about the murder of George Floyd and how horrible that was for our community and what broke out afterward. Seemingly peaceful demonstrations late in the evening broke into riots, and there was a lot of destruction. Now, at the time, I had walked through those areas 3 times and seen the buildings burned down. And one woman was extremely critical for me, wrote a complaint on my evaluation saying it was totally incorrect. I should never use the word riot, that no one has a riot, it was just social unrest. Well, that, you know, I mean, so, you know, the language is very important, but I also believe in the words of Lincoln, you can't please all the people all the time. So sometime I will say something with good intent. It was clear that I was saying this with good intent, but it was criticized. So I think one has to be very careful with what one says. Yes?
So we're talking about brand issues, it's pretty easy to identify people, but as a manager in day-to-day, how do you, in gray areas, that there's no right answer, there's, you know, you can go for perfection, or how do you go about that? I mean, things that are black and white are easy, right? But there's a whole lot of gray in the middle, and how do we navigate that as a leader?
How do we navigate things that are really very complex, that are not straightforward as leaders? You know, I think the best thing to do is to bring people around you that you work with and get other people's advice and get inputs. But then you have to make if there's no consensus, you have to make the decision. That's where the courage comes in, to make the bold call. But I think people want to feel a sense of participation. I know many times at Medtronic, we made decisions to acquire a company and 2 or 3 people were opposed to it. And I would go back to them and say, you know, we went a different direction on this than what you wanted. I heard your point of view, but we have other factors to consider. And you just have to, but I think people want to know, as Penny says, people support what they help create. And so if you feel, people feel a part of that creation. And then there are times when you have to go, look, I know you don't want to lay off 20 people on your large team, but we're going to have to do that. And I don't want you to push that upstairs. I want you to own that and to be a part of it, even though you're opposed to it. And that's hard to do, but I think you have to ask people to do that for the greater good of the organization. And yes?
What do you say to the young person who is just starting out, who's graduated from a good program, who's doing an internship with a good company, who's just on the foot on the ladder? What do you talk to them about?
Do you realize, the question is, what do you say to young people that are just getting started in their careers? Do you realize what good you can do with your qualities, your leadership? And if you get down and learn the job well, but bring that sense of doing the right thing, but always have clarity about your moral compass. So let's talk about that, because you're going to face, as he's saying, very difficult situations. We're likely heading into a recession, 60% probability I'm hearing this year. You're going to have to make tough calls. And you want to do it in the most humane way possible, but you're still going to have to make tough calls. So do you have some clarity about what you believe, how you treat other people? And do you have enough clarity to stand up for yourself if you're mistreated and not accept that you're not trying to please everyone? You cannot please everyone. So that's what I would say. But realize the potential, because I work with a lot of young people, the good you can do. And think about, where do you want to devote your energy? You can't change the whole world. You know, I'd like to eliminate all disease, but I can't do that. Maybe Bill Gates is trying. But no, seriously. And we'd like to, a lot of us like to eliminate poverty. I think no one even talking about income inequality. It's the worst problem we have in this country. You know, it's sinful. And our media looks to wealthy people. But I think you have to decide what it is you want to do and where can you make a difference, and then dive in and go to the lowest level, the first level. I won't say the lowest level. Go to the first level people and really get engaged right in your community. You can make a difference. We've all seen lots of examples in our own lives and the lives of people around us, how they've made a difference. I'll give you a simple example. You would consider this trivial, but there was a local councilman who wanted to take the railway that runs a block north of Lake Street and turn it into a greenway where people could bike, okay, and walk. And it went to an area, when we moved here in 1970, people would say, we don't want to ever live east of Hennepin. And now there are like 13 blocks of apartments that are doing exceptionally well east of Hennepin, all along the Greenway, and it goes by a line of hospital. But just this one thing that he did, okay? And it wasn't very expensive. It wasn't like our Southwest Light Rail. This was not very expensive, but yet he made a difference. And so if you can figure out where you want to make the difference, that's all I'm saying, is we can't change everything. So decide what you want to dig into and make a difference. Yes? I'll come to you next, okay?
Yeah, I'm okay if this has to become a question for another time, but I'm a veteran, and I was taught when I got drafted that killing civilians is a war crime. And 50 plus years later, my personal belief is that creating and selling weapons that kill civilians, children, should be illegal. And I'm just, do you have any, discussion inside bigger business where that's looked at from a moral standpoint?
He's speaking as a veteran, and when do, what is a war crime, and what are we doing about ammunition? Look, we have, 1.4 guns per every person in the United States. And we know and we also know that the NRA used to be funded by hunters. It's now funded by Bushmiller and all these gun makers. And so we have a serious problem. I don't know how to solve that problem when a 6-year-old child shoots his teacher. I mean, how do you, I say, are you, as a parent, aren't you obligated? Don't you have a responsibility? Why are you letting a 6-year-old get, Penny and I lived in Switzerland where everyone has a gun because everyone is in the military. All men are, thank you for your service, by the way. All men are in the military in Switzerland, but they never mix the ammunition and the guns, and they don't have assault weapons. I think it's a serious problem. Do you have an answer? I don't have an easy answer because
talking about the bigger weapons that get made and sold, and does that ever get
well, they should be outlawed, but we can't get a majority to do that. So but I do think we have a serious problem with crime in our own community. I was pleased to see the figures look better in the morning paper, but we have a serious problem with crime. Everyone wants to be safe. Don't you want to feel like that you can be safe wherever you go? And I think that's where we can work in our communities to work for that, just like we've done in this church for the homeless and some of the housing, like the Beacon Project, and the things that have been done to try and Lydia House across the street, just in our own way. That's what I'm saying. To me, that's leadership. When you take on a project like that, you're not going to eliminate all homelessness, but you can take on those projects. And I think that's what I'm trying to appeal to people, to leaders of all kinds, to do, because I think we need much more of that. And yes, that takes courage. I remember there are days we always park across the street on the north side and come into the church, and there'd be people trying to tell us not to go to church, and what kind of church is this, that putting people and homeless people over at Lydia House. And I thought it was a very good thing. And I didn't want to get in an argument with them, but I could hardly get into church without talking to them. So there are different people with different points of view. And I think it comes down to the end of the day. We were just reading about a friend of ours this morning who passed away. What did you stand for in your life? Are you standing for the right thing? And can you be that? You can't solve all the problems, but if you stand for something, and that's having that moral compass that guides you. And to me, if we can get more leaders with clarity about moral compass, and they know their values, and they have the moral courage to take a stand, that's going to bring us to where we want to get to be. Because I think that's, And I really admire people. I was interviewing a woman, she's actually lives a block from us, Beth Ford. Some of you have heard her, she's CEO of Land O'Lakes. And she was saying how ridiculous it was that she was featured in the newspaper with big headlines, the first openly gay female CEO. And she's dealing with farmers in southern Minnesota and northern Iowa. That's who owns her company. The shareholders, the owners, it's a co-op. So she's owned, and she meets with these farmers all the time. And she tells the story. She said, you know, when I go out to meet with people, I don't show up as the gay CEO. I don't show up as the female CEO. I show up as the CEO. And if that makes you uncomfortable, that's not my problem. So she has the courage to say who she is, okay, and stand by it. But she was saying that one of these farmers came up to her, and a big man, white man, tall, you know, heavy set, and he was standing waiting to talk to her after her speech. And she didn't know quite what he was going to say. And he came up and he said, I am just so proud of you. I have a son who's gay, and he broke into tears, and she gave him a big hug, and she said, I'm just so proud of you. And I think this gets to the essence of what I'm trying to say. Leadership is accepting people for who they are, and then rallying and bringing them together around a common cause where we can make a difference. That's what we tried to do at Medtronic. We didn't measure ourselves by earnings per share. We measure ourselves by how many patients we had helped restore to full life and health, which is our mission. And if we can bring people together around that sense of leadership where we can make a difference, we can't change the whole world, we can make a difference. I'll talk about my wife, who has worked for 25 years since she had breast cancer to try to change medicine. When she first started out in this, I was thinking, wow, this is mission impossible. To bring a sense of the whole person. Don't look at me as a person with a disease or a person with some kind of limitation. Look at me as a whole person, and mind, body, and spirit. And I think if we can bring that kind of sense to healthcare, don't we want to be whole people? When we come here to church, we're whole people, mind, body, and spirit. That's what we bring to it. Rather than looking at us as, in healthcare as, you know, I've got diabetes or I've got breast cancer or whatever, we want to be whole people. And I think then the thing we've added onto this, I'm just about done, is the spirit of community. And I think Plymouth is a community, but we want to bring this spirit of community. There's a community across the street called Family Tree that's just moved here and brought services that are not offered elsewhere. They moved here from St. Paul. If we can bring a spirit of community to our communities, we're trying to do this with the YMCAs. But I think if we as leaders can really make a difference, you talked about purpose starting out, if we can bring that sense of community and a sense of deep purpose to our community, how we can make a difference right in our community. So John, I wasn't in any way putting down what you said about our elected leaders, but when I hear some of these characters, I wouldn't know how to change them. But I think we're just going to do it and make a difference in our communities where we can make this world a better place. And I think my purpose has been trying to help everyone reach their full potential as leaders. So if anything else you take away from this morning, feel empowered to take the qualities that your Creator gave you at birth, that you developed throughout your life, and use them to make this world a better place for everyone. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank
What
you,
a
Rebecca.
great talk to start out the year. Thank you. Our time is officially over. As I understand, you'll sign books, right? Bill will sign books if you'd like at the table.
We have 3 books for everyone.
Yes. If you didn't get a book, get a book.
If you don't want to read it, please give it to a younger person.
And also, I wanted to mention, you have do you want to share your podcast?
What's that?
Your podcast? You have a podcast.
No, I don't have a podcast.
Oh, I misunderstood.
LinkedIn or
I misunderstood.
other people's podcasts.
I got it. Okay. I just wanted to remind everyone, next week, our speaker will be Professor Lawrence Rudnick, who spoke in this previous summer. He's an observational astrophysicist, And he'll be speaking with Seth about science and religion, and I think it'll be a fascinating discussion, and I hope you can come back next week. Have a great Sunday, and thank you for being here, and thank you, Bill, so much.